Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I am your host, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have someone very special that we have on this as a guest on our podcast today. We're going to be talking a lot about operations. And I know most of the business owners that listen to this podcast here are, mid six-figure, high six-figure to want to scale to $5, $7, $10 million business, eight-figure business. But sometimes how do you do it? How do you build the structure? How do you build the infrastructure? Whether that's, lead on the front, lead generation on the front end, operations and systems and processes, and or the back end, the fulfillment. And everything requires a system and really optimizing everything that you have. And so we decided to have this guy on here because he's just really good and excellent. He's been in this industry for 40 years. And let me just share with you a little bit of experience with him. So he's the founding partner and president of Enterprise System Partner, a business consultant firm in northeastern Pennsylvania. He was also an executive at Crayola Corporation. He has worked with more than 300 clients in business development, profit improvement, operations, selection, implementation, and project management. He's also the author of the Amazon best-selling business books, What About the Vermin Problem? And Influences and Influencers. So please welcome my guest, my man, Peter Christian. How are you doing today, Peter?
I am well. Thank you for having me, Christian.
Hey, man, I'm really looking forward to it. Love your last name, by the way, but really kind of diving into it. I know you've been in the industry for 40-some years, so obviously you know what you're doing. You've got an incredible amount of experience, but kind of tell me a little bit about your journey throughout that 40 years and obviously pivoting to now being a best-selling author on Amazon, things like that. What's that transformation look like, man?
Yeah, I started as an engineer. I actually started at Air Products and Chemicals before I went to Crayola. And it was really an evolutionary process to go from the technical side to the managerial side, and then ultimately to the executive side, because there's definitely a difference from being the doer to being the person who has to get the doers to do their things, do them correctly and on time, and all that good stuff, and keep them motivated and happy while you're doing that. So it was certainly a journey, and it was very satisfying to work with the 300 plus clients that you mentioned, because it was a variety of different companies and industries and in locations and sizes and issues and all that good stuff. So every day was a new experience for sure. It never got boring.
Definitely. And so coming from your engineering background, I mean, obviously engineers, right? They're very analytical in the way they kind of, attack a problem. So have you always been that kind of analytical mind and very detail oriented, or was that something that was kind of a learned experience?
I think it was always that way. When I graduated from grade school and I went to a technical high school, Brooklyn Technical in New York City, I knew then that I wanted to get into the technical side of business to some degree. Originally, I wanted to be an electrical engineer and wound up being an industrial engineer when I got exposed to it. And it always fascinated me, the technical part of the business. But what equally fascinated me was the people part, because no matter what you're dealing with things, you always have people involved. They impact the things you're doing. The things that you're doing impact the people. So there has to be a real good balance there. You've got to keep them truly in balance, or things do definitely get out of whack.
Definitely. And so kind of tell me a little bit more about that in regards to that. So not only are you it sounds like two pillars, right? One is operations and systems, but also then people, but how do you structure that so then obviously it facilitates really good operations and systems?
Well, I think it's a lot of pillars, actually. You've got the processes themselves, you've got the people that are doing it, you have the facilities, which could be the physical plant or the equipment and the tooling and so forth. So you've got all those things that are basically holding up the business. And of course, you've got to work with the other functions, the finance function and the sales and the marketing, because you've got to keep the consumer perspective certainly in line with what you're doing. You don't just do what you want to do because you want to do it. You're ultimately satisfying the people who are going to buy your products or your services, and you've got to be aware of what they want and how their needs and wants change over time. And certainly in the consulting world, again, you've got this variety of wants and needs of companies who are trying to forge their way and to stay relevant. And you've got to stay up with them and the latest techniques that are occurring and how they're going to fit in and utilize those things. So it's a real balancing act. I think the key thing, though, is ultimately it turns out to be the people in the end. The people who are doing what you want them to do, what they need to do in order to make things grow and thrive. Because without them, it doesn't matter. You can have the best systems in the world, you can have the best equipment in the world, but if you don't have the people trained and bought in and doing the right things, you can have a real disaster on your hands.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And what I've noticed just with like every process, every system, right? The whole goal is to build a system where, okay, hey, you can take someone off the street and implement that system, and that person knows how to do that job, right? And those are that's the power of systems and operations and processes. But let's kind of dial back into the engineering aspect. You know, obviously you've got a lot of experience in that regard, and then being able to implement it for these businesses. What were certain strategies that have helped you, like, you know, Lean Six Sigma and things like that, that have helped you throughout your life and process that you've implemented in your your consulting capabilities, you know, regarding, you know, templates or processes, or was it kind of like very a custom approach every single time that you would work with a different client?
Well, the approach I used and what was driven home in Crayola, and that was before Lean Six Sigma was the big thing and all that stuff, but we didn't even have a name for it, I would say, was to continually look at making improvements, to watch our costs and make sure that they were in line, but at the same token, to not put our people in jeopardy. The last thing you want to do is to be cutting heads of people because they get very suspicious, rightfully so. And will not cooperate if they realize that their jobs are at stake. So what you're trying to do is to make it non-threatening to them, where they know that they will continue to have jobs, not because they're there, but because they're doing the right things and that they're not getting cut for the sake of the business, so to speak. So whenever we reduced headcount in a particular area, we didn't let people go. As the business grew, we had need for more people, so we just moved those folks into different jobs, and it all worked out so that they cooperated then. They knew what we were trying to do. But we were also looking at the competition and what was going on. And Crayola had a very interesting situation of we were the leaders in the children's art market, and probably they still are to this day. I don't think anybody could probably name two or three other companies that provide crayons and markers and so forth. But we got into where all of a sudden kids got interested in other things besides art. They were into sports, particularly girls got involved in sports activities and dance and music. And then this phenomenon called video games showed up. And we were now competing with non-traditional companies and items for children's time. So we had to come up with a strategy about how to do that and do it effectively. Because, well, you know what video games are today. I mean, it's just taken off like crazy. And Crayola was very successful at doing that. We didn't lose business. We came up with a great sales and marketing strategy. We kind of focused down to a certain age segment and geared our products towards that, and also realized that we couldn't just stick with the same old stuff. We had to be new and innovating new things. And that's what companies really need to be doing. If they're just going to stick with what they're doing for 20 years, they're going to fail. Okay, even if they're excellent at it, because the world's moving on, things are changing, and like I said, people's tastes and needs and wants are changing. And if you don't stay up with that and not trailing, but recognizing that and trying to be the first ones, or at least the second ones to recognize and do something about that, then you'll be very successful. And in the meantime, you're watching your costs. You know, people will pay up to a certain amount for certain things, but beyond that, they hit a point, and you never know what that point is, so you got to be careful about it. 3 years in a row at Crayola, we didn't raise prices because we were able to contain our costs so well. So we were doing that stuff, and that followed me into my consulting routine then, because I worked for a very successful company, and now I wanted to bring that viewpoint, that knowledge, that experience, that success to other companies and say, you can do that too, if you're willing to do it. And if you're willing to lead. If you're not, you're going to have some problems.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, Peter, because let's kind of dive into that because of a lot of businesses that I consult with as well. What I've realized is if you do not measure, if you do not have certain measurements and metrics that you're measuring, then you will not grow in that avenue. However, though, there's a thing called like over measurement, right? There are certain things that you do not really need to measure because it does not move the needle further, right? Whether that's revenue, whether that's more growth in clients, whatever it may be, right? Whatever that goal is. So let me ask you this. I mean, from many experience of working with companies,
Mhm.
how micro do you get in measurement and measuring those metrics that actually move the needle further? What are those big metrics that you like? Okay, you focus on this and okay, hey, this will actually move the needle further, and this is what we need to be tracking on either a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, quarterly basis. What does that look like?
Well, it starts, of course, at the top. You've got to have a strategic focus and a strategic plan in place. And with that come then, I would say the top 3 to 5, no more than 5 things that the company really wants to focus on. If it's profitability and they want to grow that, then that should be one. If it's expansion, they want to expand to a variety of different areas. Crayola is very successful, but they're only successful in the United States. Worldwide, they're not a big phenomenon. We tried to do that, and it's just not as big a deal in other countries as it is in the US. So I would say probably 95% of Crayola sales are in the United States. Well, when you realize that, then you don't put expansion in there. You put in how do I continue to maintain and grow in the marketplaces that I have today. But you have those types of things, and then you cascade that down. So your first level of management then now takes, and they come up with their sequence of measurements that they need to do in order to support the ones that the overall company does. And you just keep cascading that down until you get to, all the levels of the company. The further down you get in the organization, the more detailed, the higher up you are in the organization, a little less detailed, a little more general, but certainly very specific. We want to increase our revenue by 10% per year for the next 3 years. That's pretty specific. Okay. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, you add new products, you increase the circulation of the products you have already, those types of things. And now you're getting into the nitty gritty details of that. So there's kind of I would say, a hierarchy, if you were to say, of the detail. The lower you go, the more the detail, the higher you go, the less the detail, but certainly very specific in what you want to accomplish in all phases. And they've got to hook with each other. If you've got things at lower levels that don't complement what you're trying to do at the upper level, get rid of them because they're a waste of time. You're spending time on things that really don't matter to the company and will really take away from what you're trying to accomplish as a company.
Mm-hmm. Which makes perfect sense. So it sounds like to me you find 3 or 4 really really strong things that you really want to focus on as a large company, and then basically work your way backwards and make sure all levels of management are aligned in those results or in those goals throughout the year in each quarter, and then as well as like getting a little bit micro. When you're working, obviously, it sounds like you've mentioned this numerous times, is, measuring your expense, right? Or the cost of goods. And it sounds like that is a measurement that you focus on when you're working with your clients. What other metrics, like at a micro level, would be valuable to kind of, focus on to make sure, hey, you know what, we're keeping costs low, but then we're really increasing profit, and then as well as like, the cost to acquire a customer or longevity of the customer, or what does that look like?
Well, if you're into capital, okay, you're handed a capital budget. Well, what is that made up of? I mean, you've got a variety of things that you can spend it on. You certainly got to maintain your facility or facilities. You've got equipment that gets aged, and you're going to replace that. Probably not with the same thing that you have today, but with something that's newer and better and certainly more costly. So you get into the specifics then of what is that going to mean? I've got a $5 million budget. What am I going to spend that on? Okay. And again, each of the things that you're working on or in conjunction to the overall goal that the company has set of increased revenue, reducing costs, whatever the specifics are that they have. And then once you get into, okay, what am I going to spend it on? Okay, am I going to design my own equipment and build it? Am I going to purchase it from somebody? Is there somebody who can purchase it from? Or, again, are we going to get into some specialty stuff? And the engineers then have to get into the design of the stuff. So now you're getting, again, into the nitty gritty detail of that. From the consumer standpoint, yes, I want to increase my sales. Where do I want to do it? Again, location matters. I'm strong in the Northeast, but I'm not so good in the Southwest. What are the opportunities in the Southwest where I can expand my markets and grow, because I don't have as much sales, whereas the Northeast is pretty saturated right now. So I'm going to spend more marketing dollars in the Southwest. What am I going to spend it on? Is it going to be on one particular item, or am I going to try to do a variety of different items? How do I want to grow that? What kind of outlets do I want to have? Of course, you've got a ton of them now. It's not just people walking into stores, but people going online and buying things. And you've got to make it attractive to them online, because they don't get to touch and feel it anymore. They got to visualize it, and you've got to make it attractive to them. So you've got all of that. So again, there's detail upon detail that feeds up to what your ultimate goals are going to be. And that's why you've got to have good people at a variety of levels that are doing that and understand it, and then complement what you're trying to do.
Which does make sense, because it definitely pivots onto that, because when consulting with a lot of business owners, what I've realized, and I don't know if you see this as well, Peter, but business owners themselves, they tend to be very big picture, right? And they're not detail oriented. In order to have these systems and processes in place, you have to be detail oriented. You have to think differently in that regard. And I also do know that business owners, they tend to be very scatterbrained, right? Shiny object syndrome. Even when they're even at, $3, $5, $7, $10 million, they're still very scatterbrained. And you have to have the right people to, like yourself and others, kind of consultants, to be able to bring them back down and do the boring work, if you will, because it's not sexy, it's not fun, but these systems and processes really help you build a stable, consistent business that helps you scale at that higher level. So my question really to you, Peter, is when you're working with these clients, what have you found are the hurdles, whether it be mental or whatever, that really cause them not to really scale to that next level, that they kind of put in their own path? Maybe the solution for it, but what are those hurdles that you find most common?
Well, you brought out a key point. There are too many executives or owners who want to chase the next shiny object, and they haven't taken care of the first shiny object that attracted them. So you've really got to get them to focus. When I would go into clients and they would say, I have this problem and I would want you to work on it. Let's say that it was productivity. My productivity is too low. Well, one of my first questions was, how does increasing the productivity fit into your strategic plan? And there'd be like this deathly silence, or as we term now, crickets, lots of crickets. And you would find out they didn't have a strategic plan. Well, you better kind of point out where you're headed and where you want to go as an organization before you start deciding what you want to start fixing and changing, because you may be completely off base and chasing something again that doesn't matter. Okay, productivity may be fine. I've had a number of cases where they said, oh, we have problems on the production floor. They're just not turning the goods out at the rate that they should be. You get on the production floor and you find out that every 5 minutes they're changing your schedule on them. Well, yeah, it's pretty hard to get stuff out when you keep asking them to tear the equipment down and to get ready for the next thing, and you give them like 2 minutes to produce stuff, and then you're on to the. So you've got to change the mindset, and you've got to get them to think strategically about the long term, and to set the course, and then to stick with the course. All right. And that's very difficult to do because there's a lot of ego involved. particularly at the executive level. You know, they got to that level because they were good in most cases at what they did, and they think that they are smarter than everybody else. They are to some degree, but again, not to the details. And when you start to mess around with the people that you're asking to accomplish things, and then you don't allow them to do it, and you keep jerking them all over the place, you're asking for trouble again. And they kind of lose sight of that fact. Even though they had that experience before when they were in those levels, there was something about amnesia as people get higher in an organization. They kind of forget what was done to them, and they tend to do it to the people, you know, the same way it was done to them, and then wonder why they're as frustrated as they were when they were in those positions. So you got to kind of bring them back into remember where you came from, all right, and stop doing that because it's harmful, and let your people do what they need to do, support them. And once you get done with one shiny object, then you can pick the next one, but don't try to do too many shiny objects at one time because, again, I would say probably 3 to 5 things. You need to do no more than 5 things at a time, all right? Because once you get beyond that, then you're doing lots of stuff for lots of things and getting nothing accomplished, all right? And that's a problem. That's an absolute problem. You're not going to get new products out on time. You're not going to get the existing products out when they need to be. You know, all sorts of difficulties are going to occur. And now you're going to spend your time trying to fix that stuff too, instead of doing the good things, because you did it in a rational and orderly manner.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned this, because what I've also discovered, and I appreciate you saying this, because with these clients that I work with, sometimes they come up with ideas. Hey, I think we need production, right? I think we need fulfillment, right? And that's what needs the the focus, right? And the reality is, once you actually get into it, and I think you probably realize this as well, you start realizing the internal operations of processes and systems in that business, and you start realizing it's not production, it's not fulfillment. In fact, what we need to focus on is just ABC, maybe onboarding, or maybe whatever, right expectations, or maybe lead generation, or maybe we're not having the right client on the front end, right? And what I find interesting is that, and kind of maybe share upon this with me a little bit, Peter, is when a lot of business owners, they don't know what to focus on, because they don't know what the best result, or if they focus on ABC, will create XYZ, which is the end result. And a lot of times we have no clarity, or a lot of business owners, they have no clarity on it. And that's where your experience and expertise comes in, because you've already worked with hundreds upon hundreds of clients, and you're like, okay, well, if you want an ABC result, I know how to do that. And it's not focusing on production. It's not focusing on this. It's focusing on maybe lead generation or quality or whatever it may be, or fulfillment. And that's kind of what I've found out. And so let me ask you, have you discovered that as well with working with clients? Sometimes they come in with a mindset, oh, we have to focus all of our time and energy on this. And you say, no, actually, it's this over here that we need to focus on, because that's going to create the result that we're actually looking for.
Absolutely. And also with the technology, it's a blessing and it's a curse. The blessing is, when it's used properly, it can be a tremendous asset to an organization. When it's used improperly, and somebody thinks that you just flick a couple of switches and everything is going to be fine, then it's a curse. And let me give you an example. One of the clients I was working with was having problems with their inventory control. Now, a lot of the inventory that they held was not their own. It was clients' inventory that was brought into them, and they had to process it. Now, they told me that 3 days turnaround from when they got it to when they processed it and went out the door. But yet they had a 15,000 square foot warehouse. They had 3 manufacturing facilities, each that had maybe 5,000 or 8,000 square feet. So now you're up to about 40,000 square feet. And then they had 8 tractor trailers of goods sitting on their property, loaded with materials. Well, you know darn well, first of all, they violated the 3-day rule, because they were never going to produce or move that kind of material in 3 days. So it's sitting around for a long time. So where did that all come from, and why did it get to be the way it did? And on top of it, they had no idea where anything was. by and large, unless they could visually see it. But you can imagine with 80 tractor trailers, if you don't have good records, after a while, you have no idea what's stored in trailer 1 or trailer 79. So they wanted to get a handle on it. So we're sitting there talking about the way to go through it, and the owner puts his finger up in the air and starts acting like a gun, and he's going pew, 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 like he's shooting a gun. I knew exactly where he was headed, but I said to him, so what's that all about? And he said, oh, you know. And I said, no, I really don't. Please tell me. So he says, I want to go to where I can use a scan gun, and I just click on the barcode or whatever code on the pallet, and it tells me what I got, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, you are so far away from that right now. We shouldn't even be talking about that. First of all, you got to find out what you got in your entire organization, where it's at, how much you got, how old it is, whether you should, probably 3/4 of it probably should have been thrown away because it was no good anymore, because it was sitting outside in tractor trailer trucks for, in heat and cold and rain. And anyway, I said, but you got to get a handle on what it is. And then you got to get the system in place, and you got to load all that stuff in. And now you can start to scan it with guns. So we're not, but yet he was bound and determined that was the way he was going to do it. On top of that, he wanted to put automatic material handling and retrieval systems in. Again, talk about putting the cart before the horse. It's like, slow down. If you can't handle it right now on a piece of paper and a pencil basis, now granted, that's a lot of stuff. So you need a lot of paper and a lot of pencils, but still, if you can't keep track of it, but it's a problem because there's so much of it, now you got a system. But if you can't even do that to begin with, and you have no clue, you ain't ready for a gun, you ain't ready for a computer, you ain't ready for a lot of stuff right now. Well, guess what? We plowed on for a while. We came up with the game plan. He didn't like it because we didn't want to buy his guns right away. So the thing stalled. So to this day, as far as I know, he still doesn't have control over that inventory. Unrealistic expectations. And again, assuming technology is going to solve all your problems, it will, but you got to get it straight first, because the computer don't know what it doesn't have in it, and it can't transact anything unless you tell it, here's what you got and here's where it is, and so forth. So, and even when you get there, you still have manual interactions. You take material out and you put some back. Well, you got to account for the material you used and the fact that you don't have 40,000 pounds anymore. Now you got 10,000 pounds, and it's not in location XYZ, it's in ABC now. But anyway, so it gets crazy sometimes. People just really are wild with what they do. And sometimes they won't listen to you. You wonder why they brought you in the first place. I'm sure you've run through that already.
Oh yeah. That's why I wanted to kind of emphasize this and the importance of being first humble and obviously, taking the advice from like yourself, Peter, where you've done it, you've helped numerous hundreds upon hundreds of clients already. It's like, hey, don't worry, I already know the problem, I already know the solution, and so if you just implement what I'm talking about, it will produce the results. And like you said, don't get the cart before the horse. I mean, you're thinking something 10 steps down the road. We're not even on step one, bud. And I think that's just a good example. I appreciate you sharing that. So now I want to kind of pivot a little bit. I know we're very excited because obviously you published quite a few books here, best-selling books, and so we want to kind of dive into this here and obviously kind of give you a glimpse of like, Peter, tell us why you wrote the books and kind of tell us a little bit about that as well. So what about the Vermin Problem and Influences and Influencers found on Amazon best-selling?
Okay, what about the Vermin Problem was book number 1. And the way that came to be was as I was working through both at Crayola and also as a consultant, I would come across some very interesting circumstances, some that were very good and some that weren't so good. And I would say to coworkers and people I was working with on projects and stuff, someday that should be in a book. And they go, you're right. I said, they probably won't, nobody will ever believe it, that we're talking about it, and I just kept collecting this stuff in my head, but I never got to writing the book. So then finally one day I said, now's the time, if you're going to do it, now do it. So what I did is I picked out 12 of the instances that I had that I thought were particularly interesting, at least to me, and I thought would be to other people. And I just wrote about them. And once I wrote, I didn't know what to do with the book. So I found a person who had published books before and had helped people to publish books. And she worked with me, and we got it in order of 3 categories that we called the good, the bad, and the ugly. If that sounds familiar, yes, thank you, Clint Eastwood. But I borrowed that as long as probably a million other people have too. And the good were instances where companies worked with us and they were very cooperative and they wanted to make the changes and all that stuff. And those were good instances, okay? And they had very successful outcomes. One client, everything we did, they instituted because they really were committed. When they brought you in, they wanted to spend their money well and they wanted to get a return on it. So they were committed to doing this stuff. They were great. Then there was the second category of what I called the bad, and that's where they fought with you. They started to argue about things. Now, why would you bring somebody in when you've got a problem? And I watch these shows on TV where they bring somebody in to fix a restaurant or a bar or whatever. And then the owner argues with them and tells them, oh, well, no, that's not the way it is. And the person that's there says, well, then why am I here if everything is so wonderful? I'll just leave and just keep doing what you're doing. Well, I'm going to close my door in 2 weeks. Well, then I guess things aren't all that wonderful. Well, you run into some of that. And I had some of that. Now, it wasn't necessarily corporate threatening, but it certainly made for a lot of headaches. And then people had to spend a lot of time cleaning up messes, ongoing messes, and so forth. So that was category 2. And then category 3 was the ugly, which is where they really went off the deep end. Okay, kind of like the example I gave you with the inventory control. And it was, and in fact, I had a couple of clients that went under while I was working with them because they just didn't listen. They argued, they knew better, they didn't want to do the stuff, okay, and they failed. And my point in that was we all make decisions in life. We all make decisions in business. And the decisions that we make certainly impact what the end result is going to be. And there's a fine line between making a good decision and making a bad decision. There's a fine line between listening to somebody and saying, yeah, I understand. Yeah, I've got a problem and I need to fix it. And saying, oh, no, I know better than you do. And I will take care of that. And that's one of the things that bugs me the most is when you work with a client, you get all done, you go to report out and they say, you didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. And you sit there and you go, you mean for the last 5 or 10 years, you knew about all these problems and you let them occur and continue to and didn't do anything. And now you bring me in and you're going to fight with me about it. So the point there is make good decisions. Recognize that you've got problems. Recognize you may be part of the problem and then do something about it. Okay? Don't fight with the person. You can question them because you've got to understand you're going to own it. You're going to have to deal with it. But at the end, if you're not committed to doing it, then don't even get started in the beginning. Save yourself the time, the money, the expense, the aggravation. You're going to fail anyway. Go and fail, be done with it, and move on. So that was book number 1. And I kind of got that off my chest. It was kind of a cleansing thing. And it was also instructional to people that are in business, okay? Book number 2, as I was writing book number 1 or getting it organized, the person I was working with said, well, you know, nobody ever writes just one book. I went, huh? I didn't have a second book that I was thinking about. I just wanted to do it. Well, she convinced me. And so I went into book number 2. And influences and influencers, I started to think about my life. You know, when we started this conversation, you kind of said, you know, what was your background and what kind of led you to where you were? Well, I started to think about that stuff. And the people in my life that had an impact on me, that helped me, or unknowingly helped me because they did some really screwy things. And I went, I would never do something like that. I'm going to stay away from that. And maybe from that person. But we have a life full of experiences. We have a life full of people that we work with, some that are very good and want to help us, whether we ask them or even if we don't ask them, they pitch in and they do stuff. And I wrote about that. and the influences that people had on my life, and probably that a lot of people have similar individuals in their lives that help them as well. And again, it was a learning experience to say, realize that, appreciate that, thank the people, okay, and never stop learning. Even at this point in my life, after 40 something years in business, I still learn a lot of things. And points of view that I had before, they can be adjusted based on new information and new technologies and so forth. So never stop learning, and don't dig your heels in and say that's the way it is and that's the way it's always going to be. And the end result of the second book, and how we get influenced and how we think and how we act, has an impact on the first one, and on the companies that, you know, made good decisions and made not so good decisions, because they weren't willing to listen and they weren't willing to change, and they had a viewpoint and that was going to be it. So that's the gist of the two books. They're not just true in business, they're true in life as well. We go through the same thing, in our life experiences. We make decisions and we take actions and we do different things. We buy goods and we sell goods and we live in a certain place and we work for a certain company, all those types of things. So they've got life lessons to them, not just business lessons as well. And I think they're very relevant to people. I think they're down to earth stories. They're real stories. I try to protect names as most as I can, because I don't think that's important. You don't need to know who told me what and who made what decision. You just need to know what the decision was and why it was a good one or a bad one.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and you bring up some very valid points. And so I want to talk a little bit on the first book. What about the Vermin Problem? Because I think
yes,
some of this stuff here is really remarkable, and then we'll kind of get into your kind of other book as well.
Okay.
But I really like what you said in regards to, like, you have some business owners, right? And I look at this through, like, job application, right? When someone's applying for a job to work with us or whatever, I have the same process as I do with working with clients. And the reason why is because, just like you said, I've realized there's tons of people out there. And there are two types of people. They're excuse makers. They justify why they're at where they're at, or they're people that are finding solutions. And I love working with people that are solution seekers, because they're willing to implement what I'm saying, the strategies, and then we're not wasting a lot of our time back and forth trying to, trying to almost build a case on the reason why they need to take action, when the reality is you reached out to me and you paid me to take action, right? And so let me ask you some certain strategies, right? When you are, whether a business owner is trying to find a client, or whether it's just people like us that are wanting to work with clients, but we got to make sure that there are red flags to see, okay, is this person, are they going to be a waste of our time, right? Mm-hmm. Is this client not going to implement our strategies? Because if so, then I could take all of my information and invest it into someone that's actually going to implement my strategies and 10x their business, right? Instead of wasting my time, all my energy and effort on this other person that's just going to sit there and just justify, well, we've done this, blah, 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 right? And just waste my time and energy. And it's not about the money. It's about really just kind of the influence and the impact. But also it's that business owner. So let me ask you, are there certain red flags when you're working with a client that you can say really quickly, okay, hey, I know this person's not going to implement, right? Is he justifying? Is he whatever? Are there certain red flags that say, okay, I don't want to work with this client. I'd rather spend my time and energy on this other client that's actually going to implement my strategies?
Yeah. I would say, first of all, if the first day that you come in, they start arguing with you, okay? Because usually you only argue with people after you get to know them for a while. And sometimes, again, it's a test to make sure that they're really meaning what they say. But if they're doing it from day one, that's a problem, okay? Because you're in for a difficult time with them, okay? If it's going to start as an argument, usually when you hire somebody, you should be so damn happy that they're there to help you that you're going to, do everything you can to make sure that they're successful. So when you start fighting with them right off the bat, red flag. Secondly, if they throw out plans, okay, for what the supposed problem is. So they haven't implemented it. They're throwing it out. They want you to kind of bless it, because then if it doesn't work, then they can blame you for it. That's a red flag. And I've seen that already too. So again, anybody who thinks that technology is just going to be the end all savior of everything has a lot coming. There's a lot of work before you get to the technology part. And if you haven't done that, you ain't ready for technology. When they tell you that they're willing to spend a lot of money on things, and then you look around and you find out that the place is falling down around them, you know that they're not telling you the truth. So now you've got a truth issue, okay? Because if they were, then the place you walked into should be immaculate, all right? And it should have the latest and greatest everything. And when it's not, then that's certainly another red flag. Going back to the person who wanted the guns, he wanted to put in this automatic retrieval system. I told him, well, I could tell him 5 companies that would sell him theirs because they were terrible to maintain and they were a headache and so forth. And I thought, how did you get to that point? Because that's after you do a lot of work and you've got an overall plan in place before you get to that point. So that type of thing. When they start to tell you how much they know, instead of listening to you and how much you know, and are not, they're speaking twice as much as you are, that's a problem. Because quite honestly, anybody who needs help should be playing deaf and dumb and should be quiet and listen. Okay. And all you should get would be head nodding of one fashion or another. Okay. And when they're talking more than you are, that's a red flag. Okay. For sure. Because they're trying to show you how smart they are and how they're in charge. And if they were that smart and they were that much in charge, they wouldn't need you. Okay.
Yep. True.
There's a reason that they need you. So use that. Okay. And the last thing I ask people, and I get strange look, is, are you committed and are you really going to do what you're instructed to do?
Yeah.
And if they hesitate, that's a red flag. Because the ones that really want help and want you to work with them, they should, without even hesitating, say, absolutely, I'm in your hands. Okay. I've done all the due diligence. I've got the reference checks. I talked to 18 people and they all told me that you walk on water and blah, 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 blah. Then they should be willing to do it because, they've gotten good references and they know that you're successful and that you're doing a good job. If they're hesitating, that means there's doubt in their minds. And if there's doubt in their minds, they shouldn't have hired you in the first place. All right. They should either have gone on their own or found somebody else or whatever the case may be. I had one where before we actually did the project, we did a pre-project because the guy went back to his advisory board and they said, well, why are you doing that? So he wanted me to come in and in a day come up with some stuff that kind of clued him off that I knew what I was talking about, that we would do a good job. And I said, I just gave you all these references. You talked to these people. They've already told you what I've done. They're not lying. And yet you want me to do a pre-project. And he says, I'll pay you for it. We'll pay you. I'm thinking, in one day, what do you do in one day, for a client, especially if it's deep-rooted problems.
Yeah.
But I thought about it and I almost fired him. Okay. I really thought, well, screw you. But we went and we did it and we came out with quite a few things. It was so damn obvious. It was unbelievable. It was like, wow. Okay. You talk about low hanging fruit. Oh my God. It was laying all over the floor. So then we were successful. So we got to the end of the project and he said to me, I almost fired you before the project started. And I looked at him and I said, I almost fired you before the project started. And he looked at me and he was stunned. And I said, you really pissed me off. I said, because you were given everything under the sun and that wasn't enough for you. I said, and that really bothered me because I got 20 years of consulting experience. And again, as you said, how do you decide to say to somebody flush and move on to the next? And I was pretty close to doing it. We turned out to be very good friends. They did everything that we recommended. A really good client. They're doing successfully, and give us a lot of credit for the success that they have now. But we almost got off on the wrong foot. Sometimes you got to kind of pull back a little bit and go, all right, let me give it a chance. Because I did like the guy and I did like the company. So there were some very positive things. If they had really been a schlocky outfit, then I might have had a different thought. But I was really close at that point to firing them. And you can fire a client. You know, people look at you and go, fire a client. Absolutely. If you're really dealing with somebody who you don't like and you feel that it's going to be unsuccessful, because quite honestly, I take this stuff very personally. If I'm not successful, if the company isn't successful, I take it personally. I take ownership of that. And there's nothing I hate more than to see a company that doesn't listen and individuals who don't listen and are failures. Okay. And it just bothers me. And I think to myself, what could I have done different? And then I have to finally say, no, you did everything you could. You were just dealing with a knucklehead, unfortunately. And there are knuckleheads in this world. It's people who shouldn't be in business, and they won't be. They'll prove it out eventually. So.
Well, 100%. And I really appreciate you sharing those red flags, because you're exactly right. If you're not aware of that on the front end, it'll save you gobs and gobs and maybe years of your time, consulting with this individual when they're not implementing any of the strategies, when you could have invested all that time into a business and into an entrepreneur and a business owner that actually, implement your strategies that actually produce incredible results. And so, it's just, the opportunity cost, right? And so to look at this and you're like, you know what, it's not worth, X amount of dollars, whatever they're paying you. Hey, I'd rather invest my time and energy into someone that actually produces. So I appreciate you sharing those red flags, because I think that's very important. And it's okay to fire your clients. And I'm just curious, you probably don't know off the top of your head, because I don't, but how many times have you fired a client where you're like, okay, you know what? Was it quick? Was it fast? Just like, firing an employee that doesn't work well. I fire them very quickly. If it's, it's just, it's better for them as well, but how fast do you fire, and how many would you say you've fired clients?
I haven't fired any immediately. The one that I just mentioned was as close as I came to doing it before we started because of the way he acted. I would say that probably I fired 5 clients of all the ones I worked for. And in each case, I gave it a chance first. I always like to give people a chance, okay? Because you can see that they have a need and you want to help them. So you give it a shot. But I had one in particular, they did lighting, lights, table lamps and lights that got put in the ceiling and so forth. And the owner the owner was pretty cool, but his wife was just so obnoxious. So we went through the first part of and in fact, she offered me a job at one point, and I thought, oh dear God, no way. But then they wanted to get into a second project, and I said no. And I was working with some other folks, and they said, but if you don't do it, then we're kind of at a loss, and their business is going to go under. And I said, well, they deserve to go under. She was just rude to everybody. She was rude to me. She was rude to the employees. We brought some other folks in to provide some consult, and she was rude to them. And I thought, I don't need to work with a person like that. Okay. So I'd say about 5 clients of all of them. Ultimately, we fired one in the middle of a project. This one I love. They brought us in because they wanted to get into a clean room operation. So, and they had never done it before. So they told us where, and we had to put an elevator in, which we did. And we're working on the clean room, and we're selecting contractors, and we're getting bids. And one day they got in touch and they said, we saw what the cost is to put the systems in to clean the air, and it's too expensive. So what we're going to do is we're going to put window air conditioners in. And I looked at them and I said, you're going to do what? And they said, we're going to put window air. And I said, that's not a clean room operation. That's an environmentally controlled, you're going to control the temperature and maybe the humidity. I said, but all the particulates, you need a specific system. You guys have never done a clean room. And now all of a sudden you're the experts. Well, the guy says to me, well, aren't you being nasty? And I said, no, I'm being truthful. And I said, and if that's the route you're going to take, I said, then I want nothing, and my company want nothing to do with this project, because when you fail and you bring the first client in to show them your clean room operation and they tell you the same thing I am, you're going to point at me and my company and say, but they told us it was okay. They said it was a clean room. I said, and I'm telling you right now, it's not. So I don't want my name associated with it. So we ended the project. We just stopped it at that point. And I just shook my head and said, I don't believe this. How can somebody be that dense? But he was. And then he calls me nasty on top of it. And I wasn't talking to him any differently than I'm talking to you right now. And I don't think you would consider me being nasty to you, but he did to him, because I was telling him something he didn't want to hear. He wanted to hear, oh, yeah, window air conditioners will be fine. Well, if they were, I would have put window air conditioners in anyway. I didn't want to spend his money just for the hell of it. But there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And he was obviously headed in the wrong direction. So,
and hence you cut ties, So my gracious, and I bet you have tremendous amount of stories, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's so important to hear this. Because if you do not come in humbly, business owners do not come in humbly, definitely with, people like yourself, Peter, that obviously have been there, done that, and can actually make a massive impact to business owners. It's just amazing. I'm glad you wrote that book. What about the Vermin Problem? Now, influences and influencers. All right. Yes. So I agree. I think it's so incredible throughout our life. We can have mentors and coaches and, direct mentors and other people that maybe, that are indirect, right? Maybe like Benjamin Franklin or, other individuals that have, mentored us, but we never actually got to meet them. So let me ask you, who were some of your influencers throughout your career, throughout the beginning of your life, and then and currently?
Well, going back to my school days, when I was attending undergraduate, my advisor and the department chairman, Professor Keebler, was just a tremendous influence on my life. You could always go into his office and talk to him about anything. He always had time. He would put stuff aside. He got me scholarships that I never knew about until all of a sudden in the mail it said, you have this scholarship and so forth. He was looking out for me. And then when I graduated and I wanted to do my graduate work there, he said to me, well, we have a limited graduate program. So he was very upfront and honest. And he said, we would love to continue to have you, but I think you should go to a different school, get a different perspective, get your degree. And then if you want to come back and do some more study here, we would love to have you. So, and I think that was a big help to me. So that was number one. Number two, when I went to graduate school then, my advisor there, who I worked with on my thesis, who was one of the most humble and smartest people that I had ever come across, Dr. Richardson, Wally Richardson, we just hit it off. And he would spin yarns, if you think I got stories, man, did he have stories. And, but he was very down to earth, but he was to the point and he didn't stand for nonsense. Okay. He taught a class in industrial engineering for the non-industrial engineering students. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the pecking order in universities, but a lot of the other engineering students don't see industrial engineering students as real engineers. They call us imaginary engineers. So he would have some of these students come in from electrical and mechanical and civil and whatever, and he put them through the ringer. He said, and by the time they got done with his course, they had a profound respect for and admiration for industrial engineering, and were glad they were in the discipline they were in instead of the one that he was teaching. He would put it to them, but he was just such a great guy. And he took me through the thesis, and we did it chapter by chapter. I never defended my thesis. I think I was the only person in the history of Lehigh University who never had to go up and defend his thesis, because he said to me, I was there with you through the whole thing. I know I can read it as well as you can. He said, I don't want to sit there for 2 hours and listen to you babble about everything I know. So I never had to defend my thesis. It was just tremendous. Awesome. Going into work, I had some great bosses. Bill Clymer, who I worked with at Crayola. Bill encouraged me to take chances, to do things. but always that if I messed something up, that I cleaned it up, made good on it. Okay, didn't leave the mess for somebody else to have to deal with and clean up. And again, a very humble man, but it's amazing. Some of the smartest people I knew were some of the most humble people I knew. Okay, you would never suspect it, and you go, wow, I didn't know how smart he was until I dealt with him, because it didn't come off. They weren't braggarts. They were confident in themselves. They did what they needed to do. They just moved on. And they treated their people very, very well. So Bill was a tremendous impact on me. Terry Schmoyer, who was the vice president, who came into Crayola and saw opportunities in me and certain characteristics that he liked and helped me with my career. And again, I could go to Terry at any time, and he would sit and listen to me and so forth. And there was a level between the two of us, but we dealt directly with each other, and he had a big influence. He was honest with me. One day we were talking about performance evaluations, and he said, I'm going to tell you a dirty secret. He says, your evaluation isn't on what you do. It's on whether we like you or not. If we like you, you're going to get a good evaluation. If we don't like you, you're not going to get a good I went back to the VP I was working for at the time, and he says, he shouldn't have told you that. Well, he shouldn't have told me that because it was wrong or because he was being truthful and you didn't want that dirty little secret out. So, he had a tremendous impact. Just a variety of other folks. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are four that stuck out who definitely had an impact on my life. And then there were some negative ones, where, like I said, you look at what they said and did and how they act, and you went, I can't do that, and I don't want to do that. That's just not the right way to run a business and to deal with people and so forth. Where they would tell you one thing to your face, and then you'd hear later that they said something different in private. And to me, if you're going to disagree, let's be upfront about it. We don't have to be friends. We still have to work together, but at least I know where you're coming from. But don't tell me everything is hunky-dory and then stab a knife in my back afterwards. So, I had some of that. And you learn from all of them. Again, they're influencers on you, okay? They influence you as to how you want to act and how you want to deal. And you pick out the good and you pick out the not so good and you discard that and don't follow that path. So, the more I think about it, I probably wasn't as appreciative to some of the people as I should have been. So I think by writing the book and mentioning them, I kind of paid homage to them and what they did for me. And I'm sure they did it for other people as well. I'm sure I wasn't singled out. They were just that way. So I hope to do the same thing. I hope to do the same thing with the time that I have, is to help people.
Yeah, and I never thought of it that way. And what you just said, I think that's really interesting, because you also have influencers in a positive way, but you also have influencers in a negative way. But it sounds like to me you still analyze it the correct way and said, okay, what do I not like about this person, and what do I not want to make sure I implement in my own life? I had never thought of it that way, even though just the way you said it was very simple. But I was like, oh, that's a good point. Being able to say, okay, hey, I don't like this, the way they do things, and making sure that I don't, analyze that, I guess. And I found that very interesting, what you just mentioned. So I appreciate you sharing that. But yeah, that's really great. And again, Peter, just before we let you go, again, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and being able to share your expertise and just consulting and being able to kind of dive into a little bit of that, giving us some red flags, but also, sharing your wisdom in your books. So Peter, before we let you go, how can our audience reach out to you, my man?
Okay. 3 ways. Number one, I am on LinkedIn. Okay. So if you look me up, and you'll see me with author, and I am an adjunct professor. I teach project management at Alvernia University. And speaker and consultant. You can pick me out, and certainly there's a connect there where you can say, I would like to connect with you and I'd like to talk and message and that. So that's number one. Number two is my email, which is my initials PH and then my last name Christian and then the number 53 at gmail.com. That's phchristian53 at gmail.com. And the third way is I do have a website that I put up mostly to talk about my books, but it's gotten into blogging and talking about speaking and consulting and so forth. And that is Pete, P-E-T-E, Christian Books. That's all one word, PeteChristianBooks.com. And again, there's a thing on there where you can send me messages and we can communicate. Probably LinkedIn and the email address are the easiest and most direct, but there's a third way if you want, which is my website.
Awesome. Perfect. And guys, those links will actually be in the description below. So make sure you reach out to him, make sure you connect with Peter. And then as well as you can go to Amazon and actually type in, what about the Vermin Problem, influences and influencers? And those links also will be on the description below. So you can purchase those. But Peter, before we let you go, is there any last words of wisdom or anything that you want to share with our audience?
Be committed. If you're going to do something, be committed. If you're not, wait until you are, or don't do it at all, because you will save yourself a lot of time, aggravation, money, okay? And if you are committed, then do what you need to do, okay? Have an open mind, listen to the people that you're working with. Don't be afraid to challenge them, because quite honestly, if they can't back up what they say, then it's a red flag. All right. But if they can, then you need to move forward with them. And don't be afraid about it. I know we're all afraid of change and the devil we don't know versus the devil we do. But if you truly want things to go differently, you're going to have to make changes. There's that old saying, you know, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. You're going to have to make changes. All right. Be aware of that. Bite the bullet. Be committed and do it, and you'll be successful. And stay up with the times. What you're doing today, in 2 years, you're going to be doing something a little bit different. If you're not, then there's something wrong, and chances are good you're having some problems at that point. So I would say
very valuable lesson. And Peter, again, thank you so much, guys. That is a commitment on that regard. And guys, that is Peter Christian. Make sure you reach out to him. Make sure you connect with him. And that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. And remember, be uncommon.